All right. Another Keenan Anderson video just popped up, and oh boy, it's a doozy. And I know what you're thinking. Now, come on, Johnny Walker Dread. We've already had a couple of really idiotic takes on it. It couldn't get possibly worse. Oh, you'd be so dead wrong. Because you forgot that there's a couple of ladies out there we can always count on to generate the absolute dumbest takes you can imagine on any kind of crime-related event. And who am I talking about? Ta-da! They're back. Oh, you're going to love it. They're going to talk about the Keenan Anderson case, and boy, it's a doozy. Hello out there. I am trying to get through.
With his powerful brainwaves cradled in the warmth of reasoning, it's time for Johnny Walker Dread to straighten you out on a thing or two. Emanating all the way from exciting Las Vegas, Oklahoma, it's the Johnny Walker Dread Show.
Now you may be wondering, well, what's this Keenan Anderson thing? Well, evidently Keenan Anderson got a little coked up and smoked a little too much pot and decided to go out driving, and he smashed his car into another one, then fled the scene. And if that wasn't bad enough, he then tried to carjack an Uber driver. During the time when he was being detained, he acted like a loon, then started to run off. And so they chased him down. I'm talking about the cops, of course, and they tased him. 5 hours later, he dies in the hospital. And these two ladies are really pissed. Let's see what they have to say about it.
So our main case today is the case of Keenan Anderson. This is Keenan. Keenan was, unfortunately, not is, 31 years old. He was a teacher with a 6-year-old son. Mm-hmm. And recently, he had an altercation with the LAPD.
He had an altercation with the PD. I wonder if they're describing that accurately.
That resulted in his death.
Yeah. Resulted in his death. Okay.
Let me tell you a little about it. This happened in Venice, California, Los Angeles area. Mm-hmm.
A really high crime area, by the way.
This happened on January 3rd. The body cam has now come out about what happened. But there was a car accident. And so Keenan himself actually flagged down an LAPD motorcycle officer.
What a great guy. He's like a good Samaritan. There's been a car accident. That's not going to stop Keenan Anderson from jumping in and saying, there must be something done. I will flag down a police officer. Gosh.
Help, because there'd been a car accident. Yeah. So there were other people in the area that had witnessed it who told the police that the accident was Anderson's fault. Mm-hmm. So the officer is talking to him, and he's apologizing and saying, please, sir, I didn't mean to.
Oh, listen to how they're describing it. They're talking to Keenan Anderson, and he's saying, your officer, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. It was just a mistake, an accident. Gee, what a nice conversation they're having.
Like it was an accident, but he was immediately terrified, which as a black man, I don't him for 1 second. Yep. At that point, Anderson's behavior started to be a bit off.
Oh, at that point, his behavior started to become a bit off. Gee, so in other words, up until that time, everything was fine. He was acting really normal and everything. But at that point, though, all of a sudden, he just started acting just a little bit funny.
Mm-hmm. Told the LAPD that somebody was trying to kill him. Mm-hmm. And when the officer asked what he meant...
Well, wait a minute. I thought that the cops were out to kill him. Isn't that what you just got done telling us, that he was terrified because of the cops? But it looks to me like he was turning to the cops and saying, somebody else is trying to kill me. Can you please help me?
He kind of tells some story about how he performed a stunt earlier and that someone was going...
That's the stunt he performed. He snorted a whole bunch of coke.
...to add stuff to his car. Like, he was behaving as though he was not well. Yeah.
he was not well. Okay. Yeah. Like he had the flu, or a little tummy ache.
Mental health emergency. He had just been in a car accident, under the influence of something. He was not well. Okay.
Yeah. No.
Under the influence of something. Oh, he's not well. Let's just gloss right over that influence thing here. Let's go back and talk about that a little bit more. Oh, no, we're not going to do that.
Should have been a big red flag immediately to this officer. But as we know, they really don't give a shit.
No, it was a big red flag, all right. They thought, oh, man, this dude is a DUI. He's under the influence of some drugs or alcohol. He's crazy, and he's somebody we have to be very careful about. That's the red flags that popped up when they were interviewing him.
No.
So he starts begging the police officer for water, that he needs a drink. And the officer keeps blowing him off that he'll get him some later.
That's not exactly true. We'll see.
And so then, he's just begging for help, basically.
Right.
At this point, Anderson is like, there's something wrong with him. It's very clear.
Right.
He gets really freaked out. So he jogs to the other side of the intersection from where this incident happened.
He jogs to the other side of the intersection. There's only one small problem. He was being detained. He's not allowed to do that.
So the police follow him, chase him, basically. This was originally made out to be that he fled the scene of an accident. He walked across the street, you guys.
Right.
Yeah, he didn't flee the scene of the accident. Here's what he did. He got up and he went over and he pushed the little button, and he waited patiently for the little walking symbol and that little voice that comes out and says, do not walk or whatever it is. And he's waiting there, and it turns the little man symbol shows up and he starts to walk across. And of course, the police officers are like, oh, look at him walking across the intersection like that. We need to beat him up. We need to kill him.
He was feeling really upset. He was clearly not really with it mentally. So the officers went after him. They decided that what they needed to do was pin him to the ground and tase him a bunch of times because he asked for help because he'd been in a car accident. Apparently,
the cop said, hey, what'd the guy do? He asked for help. Let's pin him to the ground and tase him. How dare he ask for help from a police officer? Yeah, that's their take on it. He was pinned to the ground because he asked for help.
Apparently.
Yep.
They pinned him down. They tased him repeatedly. At one point, they tased him for more than 10 seconds, continuously.
Yeah.
And, the more you tase somebody, the more you're at risk of killing them. And if they are in a mental health crisis or a physical crisis, people
of their own doing
are more at risk of being killed.
Tasing isn't called for every suspect. It's not.
Well, that's generally true, sure. How do you know it wasn't called for in this case? They really don't know what happened. They only heard about what happened.
No, and we'll talk about that in a minute. We're going to talk about what LAPD's use of force policy is, which none of these officers clearly give a shit. At one point, he's screaming, they're trying to George Floyd me.
Mm-hmm.
The guy's terrified.
Yeah.
No question. Eventually, they handcuffed him and they took him into custody. He went to a hospital in Santa Monica where he was later pronounced dead of cardiac arrest.
5 hours later. She doesn't mention that.
You know what tasing can cause?
Yeah.
Cardiac arrest.
Yeah.
So does a drug overdose.
This story is horrifying to me on so many levels. First of all, this guy asked for help from the police. He's exhibiting having some kind of crisis. He's been in a car accident.
Right. I mean, he could have been confused. He could have hit his head on the steering wheel.
Oh, yeah, he could have hit his head on the steering wheel. So let's just assume that.
Right.
We don't know. He was having some kind of a medical incident.
He was. And they did not care, treated him as though. So let me tell you LAPD's use of force policy, a few things about it, because I think this is important to know. Their first and foremost, they are to use de-escalation techniques.
Which the officer did.
Which, I would imagine getting him a drink of water having him sit down, say, "Sir, you've been in an accident. Let's get you settled and get an ambulance here to make sure you're okay."
Yeah.
Would have been a great de-escalation technique,
Yeah.
but instead they keep blowing him off that they're not doing that.
It's not like we're talking about a dangerous criminal.
No, we're not.
No, just a person who's coked up and slammed his car into somebody else's car.
Anyway,
He didn't have a weapon. He wasn't threatening anyone, and he was behaving as though he was in crisis of some sort.
And by the way, he tried to carjack another car, but that's not dangerous.
mhm.
Where feasible, a peace officer, my God, they've got to stop fucking calling him that.
Mhm.
Prior to the use of any force, make reasonable efforts to identify themselves as a peace officer and to warn that force may be used. Now, why would there be force used?
Because they can't control him because he's crazy. That might be a reason.
Right.
Proportionality. This is important. Officers may only use a level of force that they reasonably believe is proportional to the seriousness of the suspected offense or
Mhm.
reasonably perceived level of actual or threatened resistance.
Yeah.
He was in a car accident and he walked across the street.
He was in a car accident and he walked across the street. Come on, everybody.
Their proportional response was to pin him down, tase him multiple times, and arrest him for
By the way, also resisting arrest, which typically does produce a tasing incident. Now, in some states, you can't use a taser to control somebody. I don't know about California.
What?
arrested for.
He had every right to go across the street.
He had every right to go across the street. No, lady, he was being detained. He does not have the right to go across the street.
He wasn't arrested.
Right.
At
He
that
wasn't
point,
arrested. He
He
wasn't being
wasn't
charged
running
with
from the
anything.
police.
Right.
This was a
If
car
anything,
accident.
he may have been ticketed for that car accident.
Right.
But that's not.
No.
This doesn't match.
That's right. He was only going to be ticketed for what happened. He's high on coke and pot, and he slams his car into another one, and he tries to carjack an Uber, but he would have been ticketed for those things. I mean, I realize it's California, so maybe they're right.
Yeah.
No, not at all. Not at all. But like they care. They don't care. They don't give a shit. This is very obvious. Over and over again, we see this. And they don't follow their own policies.
Mm-hmm.
They don't respect human beings. They don't acknowledge that he's having some kind of a medical crisis.
Right.
They don't get him the help that he needs. Then they pin him on the ground and taser him a whole bunch of times and send him off to the hospital where he dies of cardiac arrest.
Yeah.
So this incident is being investigated. Boy, we've heard that many times.
And by the way, notice that they know already about the cops here. They know that they don't care, and they know this and they know that. And of course, when it comes to Keenan Anderson, well, he probably hit his head on the steering wheel. He was probably just having a little bit of an episode. You know, this is the bullshit you have to put up with. The truth of it is that we don't know fully yet what took place, but it does not look good for Keenan Anderson. Well, it definitely doesn't look good for him now, but in terms of his reputation, it looks like he was not quite the good dude that everybody thinks.
Yeah.
And the chief of police, he comes out with this big, long, blah, blah, blah. We really care about these situations, blah, 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 bullshit.
Prove it.
He does say that he's very concerned about this incident because to him, when he watches the video, it's very clear to him that this person was having a mental health emergency
Mm-hmm.
and that mental health support should have been called in. Why wasn't medical help called in?
Right.
There was a car accident.
Right.
And this guy's acting weird? Yeah.
In Idaho, when there is a car accident, the ambulance and police are called simultaneously. That's just the
Right.
way it's done.
Right.
And one or the ambulance might get waved off if we end up not needing them. And of course, I know we're talking about a much larger place that probably, that's easier probably to provide here. But
By the way, if you live in Idaho, you probably have really high taxes because if they're calling out the ambulance for every accident, and then waving them off, that costs money. I'm sorry. All right. I don't believe her, frankly, but maybe she's right. Maybe they do that as a matter of policy, but can you imagine trying that in Los
Why
Angeles?
wasn't an ambulance called?
But
And
this
also,
man-
they have mental health support staff, and they didn't even bother to use
they
them.
do, and they didn't use them. And
Because this was a traffic accident. It was a collision. This became now under a criminal investigation. And what if old Keenan Anderson happened to have a knife and he sent the old social worker in there to take care of it?
what right did they have multiple officers to pin him to the ground and tase him over and over again and arrest him? For what? What
Right.
was he arrested for? He didn't do anything illegal.
No, he didn't. Okay, so let's go through the list. Possession, he was on cocaine, so that's probably still a crime in California. Driving while he was on cocaine, that's definitely a crime. Fleeing the scene of an accident, it's another crime. He was detained and then he fled. Can't do that. And then when they tried to pin him to the ground, he resisted arrest. There was another. And then there was that pesky Uber incident where he tried to carjack a car. I think that's a crime as well. And jaywalking.
They hadn't even determined what the accident was. He was just a black man, so of course immediately that means he's a criminal. This is the biggest bunch of horse shit I've ever seen, and I have said that so many times in these cases, but it is absolutely ridiculous. And the big apology from the police chief, and we're looking into it, means nothing.
All right, I'm a little tired of this nitwit. Okay, let me explain something to her. All right, you're right. They didn't know what happened. That's why you detain people. It's to determine what took place. It's kind of hard to detain people when they just get up and run off, right? And so the police have powers to not only detain people, but make it stick. They can make you stay there until they sort it out. They don't know what you're up to. You might be a hardened criminal. They don't know. So they're going to detain the guy, especially since he's acting like a lunatic. So this notion out there that, well, he hadn't been convicted of a crime yet, so they can't do anything, is pure baloney. In every one of these incidences, the person that's being detained is just a suspect. He's a suspect just like a bank robber is a suspect. And that's why we have the power to detain.
Means nothing. Your own policy says that they should never have done this because this was not proportional. There was no risk of harm to anyone.
Well,
He tried to carjack an Uber. What do you mean he wasn't a danger to anybody?
And he wasn't.
we
even-
didn't have one
he
single
didn't
voice of
commit a
reason there.
crime.
Right. Not one single voice of reason. Not one single cop that was willing to say, hey, we're not tasing him. What are you doing?
Let him. He didn't do anything.
Because every cop was trying to get him under control. They can't just let him walk off. They have to get the cuffs on him. And when a crazy person doesn't want to be cuffed, they can be a real handful. But I tell you what, the next time, they'll let you step in and take control of the situation. See how you do.
Yeah, this isn't okay. No.
And if the accident, it was deemed that he needed to be ticketed or he was determined to have it was a DUI or whatever, fine. But none of those things were even determined.
Mhm.
None of that was even worked out. They just zeroed right in on him as the criminal
Mhm.
and they killed him.
And there were people that said he's the one that caused the accident and he's running around the middle of the street acting crazy. Yeah, I think that the police had every right to detain him until they could sort out what happened. And again, when you're detained, you can't just run off.
This was
Yeah.
murder.
What? Yeah.
This was murder.
Mhm.
This was a murder. Okay.
Now, something to know about Keenan is he is the cousin of one of the founders of Black Lives Matter.
Mhm.
Like that matters. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know we had a cousin of the co-founder of BLM. I guess we just got to let him go. And by the way, when talking to Patricia Cullors, she clearly indicates that he and her had different grandfathers. At most, he's a third cousin. I don't even know if she even knew him. So Yeah, I ain't buying that. It doesn't matter. Just because you're the cousin of the co-founder of BLM doesn't give you the right to just act like an asshole.
And the family, and there's going to be some shit go down with this, because
yeah.
he's got lots of family support behind. This one isn't just going to disappear,
No,
as none of them should.
no, but they
Yes, it will. As soon as you start to find out what the true facts are, this will disappear, and you'll just move on to another incident. One that you think really clearly shows that cops are in the wrong. What happened to that one with Keenan Anderson? Well, yeah, let's move on. We don't know what happened there, but what about this new one? That's how it works. You guys always claim that you're going to stay on this and you're going to stick with it until you find out what happened, and then all of a sudden, you just abandon it. When's the last time any of them ever got on there and said, you know what, I guess we were wrong? We looked it over, more information came out, toxicology reports came out, the dude was really high on coke. It looks like that might have contributed to his death. It looks like we maybe were a bit unfair to the police. That will never happen in a million freaking years.
frequently do, if they even get any press at all.
Right.
For the ones that we hear about, how many
There-
are there that we don't hear about?
Right.
Lots.
None, because we hear about every single one of them. That's how this selection bias occurs. Now, there's a lot of white people who get killed and stuff, and we don't hear anything about them. But in terms of like minorities and stuff, if the cops shoot them, we're going to hear about it up the yin yang.
Well, apparently there are 3 cases being investigated by the chief of police or whoever because of similar incidents like this in the last year. Color me
well-
not surprised at all.
So at what point do we stop investigating these, start charging some people, and end this?
Yeah.
We're
Get
just
rid
gonna
of
keep
these
investigating
murderous
them?
police
Yeah.
officers.
We don't even know what the other 2 were about. They don't. Evidently, there's these 2 other incidences. Neither one of them know what happened. The one on the right definitely doesn't know, and she's already saying murder. That's how it works.
Just makes me so sick and so sad for his family, for his son, for his students.
Yeah.
He's from DC,
Yeah.
and he was in California visiting family over the Christmas break. And so his students that have had him for the first half of the school year now have a murdered teacher, his child, a murdered father.
Mm-hmm.
His family are absolutely heartbroken and terrified. What are they supposed to do in that situation? He cannot ask the police for help, or they will just kill him?
If he had asked the police for help and done what they told him to do, none of this would have happened. None of this would have happened. And if he had just said, okay, man, I'm being cuffed, fine. Instead, what he did was he resisted arrest. And I have told you all 1,000 times, man, when you resist arrest, that raises up the testosterone in the cops. It's called a normal human reaction. So don't do it. Don't do it. Go along, comply. You're going to get your day in court. But instead, people like these 2 egg them on. You see, it's perfectly normal to think that you're going to get killed. So it's so perfectly normal to try to run. Oh, that's great advice. Yeah. Again, they think they're doing a favor to these people. They're not. They're just encouraging them to act irrationally when they encounter the police. You're not going to outrun the police. They're going to catch you. And it's better to maybe just go along with what they're doing and you'll have your day in court. But no.
What is someone supposed to do in that situation? What should he have done?
Right.
There is no right answer here.
Yes, there is a right answer. He is not the first black man to have ever been in a car wreck and have the police arrive on the scene. That has happened thousands of times. And they all survived. What's he supposed to do? Act like them. Oh, and by the way, I can't imagine what he must have been like as a teacher. Right? Keep in mind, coked up, stoned, driving around, gets in a car wreck, tries to carjack an Uber, and you saw him. He's crazy. Can you imagine what his lectures must have been like, right? Like, okay, everybody, we talked about dangling prepositions today, and the reason why you don't want to have dangling prepositions is because they're out to get me. Ooh, I just pulled a stunt. And the students are like, oh, shit, here we go again. Yep. Teacher's gone crazy again. Does anybody out there think that this was the first time he ever did anything like this?
None.
And you know, I would have gotten away from the cops too if I were him, because
Right.
he's really
Yeah, you do that. You do that, okay? In fact, I encourage it. That way we wouldn't have to watch your stupid videos anymore. The next time you get pulled over, you act just like him. Tell us how it works out.
realizing I've asked for help from the police, and they're looking at me like I'm a criminal.
Mm-hmm.
And who knows what kind of medical emergency he was having.
Right.
I don't even know if we will know, because they killed him before we could even find out.
Oh, I could tell you what kind of medical emergency he was having. He was drugged out. There you go. That's all you need to know.
Mm-hmm.
Was he injured from the crash? He did have marijuana and cocaine in his system. We don't know if he was actually under the influence at that time.
No, hell no. I mean, yeah, if your Republican politician gets pulled over for a DUI, what would you be saying about him? So irresponsible, murderer, out to hurt innocent people. They need to throw people like him in jail for the rest of their lives. But this guy, well, he had some coke and pot in him, but we don't even know if he was under the influence of it. Oh, geez.
Mm-hmm.
Because, of course, there was no actual investigation here. They just killed him instead.
Yeah.
Because getting in a car wreck deserves death on the street by the police.
Yeah, that's what they did. They decided that, look, guys, do you want to investigate this? I mean, like, this is going to be a lot of trouble. And I'm sure one of the other cops said, hey, you know what? I got an idea. Why don't we just kill him? And that way we don't have to investigate it anymore. Yeah, that's what happened.
Apparently.
Oh my God, these cases, you guys. It makes me so sick and so angry. I am so fucking tired of these stories. I am so tired of hearing this and seeing this.
Yeah.
How do we stop this?
By acting like normal human beings when you get pulled over. You stay at the scene and then you exchange like driver's licenses. And when you do that, you foil the cops' evil plot.
This is why people march and riot and say defund the police. This is why.
Oh, so we're now going to rationalize rioting. You heard her. She said it. This is why we riot.
If this had been a white man, first of all, this would have never happened to a
Oh, really?
white man.
No.
But if it had, can you imagine the outcry in this country?
There would have been none. There would have been none. Well, imagine the outcry when in Fort Worth, a cop shoots a black woman inside her house. It was a terrible thing to have happen. It was tragic. We get it, okay? There was an absolute ton of anger and outrage. However, in South Carolina, pretty much the same thing happened. Cop goes up to the man's house and sees him and shoots him through his window. And I bet you they don't even know it happened. On my channel, I've talked about so many of these incidences that happen to white people, and nobody cares. What about this kid? He opens the door to a cop carrying a Wii controller. The cop thinks it's a gun, smokes him, kills him. How many people were outraged over it? Nobody even cared. It's the same with this guy. He was resisting arrest just like Keenan Anderson. He tried to grab the cop's taser. She pulls a gun, sticks it in his stomach, and shoots him dead in front of his family. How much outrage? None. The cop was never even charged.
Yeah.
if Keenan had been white.
Mm-hmm.
That would not be put up with for one fucking second, but he's
Yep.
black. So
Yep.
it's okay. Yeah.
Yep.
I'm so done with all of
Mhm.
this shit. I just, and we all say we got to vote, we got to pay attention to our own police and police policy and all of those things. Yeah.
Mhm.
But is it getting any better? Because it sure feels like to me it's getting worse. We occasionally
I don't know that
have
it's getting
somebody-
better, but the awareness at least is, and
Right.
awareness does create change.
It does.
But I think we're in the infancy of creating.
No, it doesn't. The awareness is not creating any change. The change you need is to quit acting like jackasses when you get around the cops. Don't do things to jack them up so that they end up hurting you. That's the change that needs to take place. The awareness of the fact of what happens when you screw with the cops is not having an effect at all.
Creating change.
Right. Every once in a while, like Derek Chauvin, who murdered George Floyd with the help of a bunch of his officers, was found guilty by state of murder and also of a hate crime.
That's right. He was convicted. So is that an example that supports your claim?
Mm-hmm.
But did that solve anything? No.
No.
I mean, LA police still think it's okay to murder somebody for getting into a car accident and asking police for help.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to do this case. Well, I always want to do these cases, but I particularly wanted this case to come out on Martin Luther King Day because this is where we are.
Yep.
If you think it's gotten better, it hasn't.
Yeah.
And we all have to be aware. If you live in LA, if that's your chief of police, if that's your police force, please make your voice heard. Yeah. I don't even know what else to say. I'm just so fucking pissed. It's horrific.
Yeah.
I would suggest you actually look at the facts, then talk. You'll even really know what happened. So we see this all the time with the Kyle Rittenhouse shootings as well. People don't know what happened and they just decide to go ahead and make shit up. This is propaganda, as always. Like my video and subscribe to my channel.